Okay, so in this video, we're going to make our own version of the old Atari classic called Breakout. Let me show you an example here. I have the executable. And you have a paddle. You have a ball that bounces around. Bounces off the walls. And then it breaks the blocks at the top there. All right. So we move the paddle, and then whenever the ball hits, it bounces off, and then it hits the blocks, and then it bounces off the blocks, and then comes back down. And then if we hit the bottom, then we get a message box that says, hey, you lose. Okay. So, a few things that we need to know. Alright, so here's our form. And we have the ball here. These are going to be picture boxes. And some of the properties that we're going to have to deal with are pick ball left. So the left, it's the distance between the left edge of the control. So we have our picture box. This is the left edge. And the left edge of the form. So this side here. So that distance is set in the left property. Same thing goes for the top. The top is the distance between the top edge of the form and the top edge of the control. So we'll need to manipulate those two properties in order to make our ball move around. Other things that we will need to know is going to be when we have an event handler for the mouse move, right? So whenever we move the mouse, the paddle is supposed to follow, right? So we'll need to get the location of the cursor, which is the x coordinate of the mouse cursor, and then subtract that by the width of the paddle divided by 2. And then we'll set the left edge or the left distance of the paddle and we'll set it equal to this formula here. All right, this will make a little bit more sense once we start actually building the actual game. And the other thing here would be the client size for the form. All right, so we're going to need to know the dimensions of the form as well, and those are stored in the height and width property. Okay. So to get started, go to Visual Studio. And we'll do a new project, and then we'll go to Visual C#, and make sure you select Windows Form application for this, and then we'll name it Breakout Video. And I think I have another version of this already, so I'm going to call mine Breakout Video 2. But you don't have to do that on yours. Okay. So here's our Windows form. We should have our Solution Explorer here. I don't think we'll need the output. We will need, however, to make sure we see the toolbox with all our controls. All our form controls will be here. And we also need to see the Properties window. So we can go to View and then Properties. So that should all be right here. And I'll extend the width of this a bit so we can see it a little bit better. And then I'm going to increase the size of my form. I can actually set the property for the size. Let me just see if I find it real quick. Maybe I can use something like 500 by 500. Make it a perfect square. There you go. You can do something like that. You can make it a little bit bigger if you want. Maybe 600 by 600. Okay, so then that'll set the width of the form. You can also change the background color of the form, do anything else you want. Here, all that is controlled through these properties. All right, so back color. Let's say I want to change the background. I can make it blue if I want. All right. Now, first thing we'll do is we'll work with our picture box for our ball. Alright, so here's the picture box. So we'll go ahead and drag that out. And right now this picture box doesn't really look like a square. It looks more like a rectangle. So then we'll go to our properties here. And let's see, so size. We can make this maybe 50 by 50. See how that looks. It's a little big. It's a little bit too big, maybe. Let's try half. Let's try 25 by 25. Okay, so that's a little bit better. Let's go ahead and set the color of this. Now, if you don't see it in this way, you can also alphabetize your properties. Make sure you have the properties selected and they're in alphabetical order. And the back color here, I can make it go to web. I can make it a very bright color like red, so it stands out. Okay. So we'll have our first picture box here. Right? So we compile this and run it. And there it is, right? But if you notice, it's not moving. It's not really doing anything. So we'll work on getting it to function. Okay. So we'll work on that. What we need is a control in the toolbox called a timer. The timer, you can think of it as a loop, but it has certain ticks. And watch, let me put it here. So I'm going to drag it out, put the timer there. And it has an interval. Every 100 milliseconds it'll tick. And each time it ticks, then it can execute some sort of code. Right? So the frequency of elapsed events in milliseconds. So the timer's constantly running, and each tick of the timer will occur every 100 milliseconds. Right? So we can use that to make our ball move around. Now, a very important feature here is the timer by default is disabled. So always make sure it's set to true. Okay. And another important property for our picture box, so click on our picture box here. You'll see that the properties changes. So then here the name, we usually don't want the default name. We want to change it to something that's easier for us to program. So I'm going to put pick ball. Okay. And then I'm going to close out the output window there. Alright, so that way we apply an appropriate name to it. That way it's easier for us to code later on. Okay. Now, the next thing we'll do is we'll start programming this form here. So we could probably go right click here, right click on the form, anywhere in the form. You can go to view code, and that'll take us to the code for the form. And we have a whole bunch of different things here. We can leave those there for now. We don't really need all of them, but we'll leave it for now. Since we are using Windows Forms, we're using system, we're using quite a bit of this stuff. And if you look at this here, we have the namespace. We have this is the constructor for our form. That's form 1. And so whatever functions we need to run when the form first is instantiated, when the form first becomes available, we can run that code here. Alright. Now, we can program the ticks for our timer. So to do that, double click here on timer 1 tick, and that'll automatically generate an event handler for us. And then we can use this event handler to do whatever we need to do. Okay. So we'll need some instance variables for this form here. And we'll start off with the first one, which is going to be our vertical speed, the vertical speed of the ball on the screen. So we can call that v speed, or actually set the data type int v speed. Okay, we'll start with that. And we can initialize our v speed in the constructor. So v speed will be, we can start with 1 first of all. Okay, so we'll initialize our v speed to 1. And then what we'll do is we will set, remember we looked at this diagram here earlier, and the pickball.top, which is right here, this is the distance from the form to the top edge of the control. So if we want this ball to move, then we need to increase the top of the pickball. Okay, so to do that, we're going to do pick ball and then dot top, and we're going to increase it by the vertical speed. So we'll do plus equals v speed. Okay, and remember this tick is going to run every 100 milliseconds. So if we run this, we can see what happens. So run that code. And it's moving really slow, but it's moving. The vertical speed is making it move because the distance from the top to the top of the control is increasing every 100 milliseconds. We can adjust the timer. So go back to the design, go back to the timer, and then maybe instead of every 100 milliseconds, maybe every 10 milliseconds we want to increase it. We'll run that. You see, now it's moving a little bit faster, right? Okay, but as you saw, it went off the form. So we'll need to adjust that. Now, we need it to move not just vertically, we also need it to move horizontally. So we can also do public int h speed. And then we'll initialize h speed h speed should probably be capitalized for the horizontal speed, and we'll initialize that to 1 as well. Okay, and then if we look at the diagram, here's the left edge of the pick control, and we want to increase this distance as well. If we increase both the top and the left at the same time, then our ball will move in the it'll move diagonally. Right. So if we go here, we do pick ball dot left plus equals h speed. Okay. Then we'll see what happens. We'll go and compile that, and then you see it's moving in the diagonal direction. Okay, but it's still going off the form. So we'll need to fix that. That way it doesn't disappear on us. Okay. Okay. So now we need to prevent the ball from going off the screen. So we'll work with the top first. So I'm going to comment out left for now. And what I'm going to do is, so let's run this again. And as the top increases, right, it just goes on forever. So what we want to do is we're going to do an if statement here. And we're going to say if the pick ball dot bottom, which is the bottom edge of the control, if the bottom edge becomes greater than, and we're talking about the form that we created, the form 1. So we're going to use the this pointer to refer to it. So if this client size dot height, so if the bottom becomes greater than the height of the form, then what we're going to do is we're going to make vSpeed, we're going to change its direction by changing its sign. So I'm going to set it to negative. So that way it'll move in the opposite direction. Right, so right now vSpeed is positive, and as the timer ticks, it's adding 1, and then 1 becomes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But then as soon as it reaches the bottom, we want it to change the vSpeed. If it's positive, we want it to become negative. So then that way it'll start moving up the form. So we'll see how that works here. All right, so it's going down, the vSpeed is still increasing, and then as soon as it hits the bottom, we switch the sign on vSpeed, and then it starts going up. And then as soon as it hits the top, it's supposed to come back down again. Okay. So that means we need probably another if statement here. So if pick ball dot top, if the top becomes less than 0, in other words, it's going off the screen, off the top edge, then we'll also change the sign of the vSpeed. So if it's negative, it'll become positive, and if it's positive, it'll become negative. Okay. So now let's run that, see what happens. Alright. So hopefully once it hits the top, once top becomes less than 0, it should move back down. Right? And that'll keep it within the form. And that way it doesn't go off the form anymore. Alright. Minimize this a little bit. And that there. Okay. So now what happens if I include the horizontal speed? Let's see what it does. Alright, well, it never actually hit the bottom, so it's just going to go off forever. So we also need if statements to prevent it from going off the screen to the right or to the left. So to do that, what we'll do is if pick ball dot right, if the right edge becomes larger than the form, oh, actually the width, not the height, then we'll do the same thing to the horizontal speed. We'll do h speed equals negative h speed. And we can have one more if statement. So if the ball's left edge becomes less than 0, then we'll do the same thing. You probably could have combined these two conditions and using an OR, but just so you can see it separately, I have it in separate ifs. Okay. So now these 4 if statements should keep our ball where it belongs. All right, so we'll see what happens there. So as soon as it hits and the right edge becomes larger than the width of the form, then it changes the direction. Alright, so now it's going to hit the top, and it's just going to bounce. Okay. And it's actually going to bounce in the same place forever. So once we have the paddle in place, then the paddle will allow our ball to bounce everywhere, not just from one corner to the other. But it is working as intended, right? Okay. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go to the design form, and we'll create another picture box for our paddle. So picture box, which is right here. And the picture box, I'm going to open up the properties here. Close out this output window. And we'll set a few properties on it. We'll set the color first of all. And I'm going to just choose any color. Oh, maybe blue. I think blue would be nice. We already have blue. Maybe like that. Yeah, that looks okay. And then the size, it's 100 by 50. I want it to be longer so it's easier to use. So maybe I could do something like 200. Oh, oops. Let's make this 200. Maybe something like this. And then the height can be the same as our ball there. Alright, that looks pretty good. And where you place this, it doesn't really matter. You could probably place it in the middle if you want. It doesn't matter. Okay, so if we load this, we have our paddle, but our paddle is not moving. And what we want the paddle to do is we want it to follow the mouse cursor. And we could do it two ways. We can either put the cursor somewhere here in the middle and then move it back and forth like this, or it can just follow the cursor no matter where it's at on the form. Now, it'll be a little bit easier for the player if it can move from anywhere on the form, right? So that way it's just kind of following the cursor. So we can do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the form itself. Don't click any of the controls, just the form. And then I'm going to look at the events that I have here. So I'm going to click the little lightning bolt. And what I'm going to do is here, there's an event called mouse move. And if you click on it, it says occurs when the mouse pointer is moved over the component. So in this case, the component or the control is going to be form 1. So this event is going to be generated every time I move my mouse. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to double click. All right. And that'll generate my event handler here. So whenever I move the mouse, this code here will be executed whenever I move it over the form. Now, what I forgot to do was go here, very important property. So go back to properties, and then go back to picture box, and then go ahead and name this pick paddle. Right, it's a paddle, so we'll name it that. And that way we can program it. Okay. Now, if we look at the form here, here's the formula to make the paddle move, right? So we're going to change each time the mouse moves over the form, we're going to adjust pick paddle.left, and we're going to set it equal to the location of the cursor minus the width of the paddle divided by 2. Okay. So we can do this in steps. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust pick paddle dot left, and I'm going to set it equal to, and here this is the thing that generates the event. All right. So in this event, the mouse move is going to be the cursor is going to be the thing that generated this event. Right. Now we don't have any other events to compare, but here E is going to be the mouse, and the mouse has different properties. Like when somebody clicks on the mouse, we have the X coordinate. So that's the X coordinate of the mouse during the generating mouse event. Okay, so that's the position of the mouse cursor on the actual form. Right? It has an X coordinate, and it has a Y coordinate. But for this, we're just going to need the X coordinate. Okay. So I'm going to leave it just like this, and then we're going to see what happens. So I'm going to run it. Oh, and look at that. The ball is following the mouse. Oh, that's kind of neat. We put the wrong control here. Well, my fault. I put pick ball. I meant pick paddle. Pick paddle. Okay. So you see now the paddle is following the mouse. Right. Of course, the ball still went through it. We'll need to program that eventually, right? And we will. But the point is, first we got to make the paddle move back and forth. And see, here it's following it, but notice that I try to move to the middle of the paddle and I can't. Right? It's always on the left edge. So it's just following it. It might be easier for the player if I could move the cursor over a little bit, at least halfway down the paddle. So that's where we do the subtraction here. So we do minus, and then we need to get the width of the paddle. So I'm going to put in parentheses. So I'm going to do pick paddle dot width. Okay, so let's see if I do that. See what happens. See, now it's following the other edge. Okay, so that we don't want either. So we want it to be in the middle. So that's where we divide it by 2. Now run that. And then see, there you go. Now that's a little bit more intuitive. Because no matter where I put it, it's always going to be following it. And it's always in the center. Okay. So now this has, if you're doing this with me, you'll notice that you'll have much more control of the paddle if it's off directly dead center. Okay. Now we need to program the collision between the ball and the paddle. So to do that, it's not too challenging. But that's going to have to occur in the timer. So in the timer, when ball collides with paddle, then we need to change the vertical speed. So once it's going to have to bounce off. So whenever something bounces off, it's going to have to move in the opposite direction. Okay. So we could do something like this. If pick ball dot bounds dot intersects with, and then intersects with is a function that takes one argument. And you can put a control here. So I'm going to do pick paddle dot bounds. Okay. So whenever this is true, so in other words, if the boundary of the pick ball intersects with the boundary of the paddle, in other words, they both touch, then we need to change the vertical speed. So then we'll just change it the way we did it before. We do v speed is negative v speed. So if it's negative, it becomes positive. If it's positive, it becomes negative. And remember, we're doing that in the tick event. Okay. So then we'll wait for it to come down. See, there you go. Now it starts bouncing. Now we can also change the horizontal speed and see what that does. What weird effect we get. So let's try that. So we'll do h speed equals negative h speed. So let's see what happens when the ball collides. And we change both the vertical speed and the horizontal speed. It's okay. I kind of like it just with the vertical speed. We can also try just the... Yeah, that doesn't seem very natural. Let's try just the horizontal speed. Yeah, no, that's even weirder. Okay, so it's just gonna have to be v speed then. Okay. Yeah. That gives it more of the feel of it bouncing, right? So it's going to start moving up when it hits it because it's coming down, and as soon as it hits, it moves up. But the horizontal speed stays the same. All right, so that's better. Okay. So that's pretty good. Now we have the ball moving around. We have a paddle. The last thing we need is our blocks. Right? We need a set of blocks, and we don't have any blocks. So maybe what we can do we can make an array of picture boxes and use those to fill in the rest of the form. That way we have the blocks to break. So we can do the array, a two-dimensional array. So for that, we're probably going to need public. We'll need the number of rows, and we'll say 5. And we're going to need in columns, and we'll do that 5 as well. Okay. And then we'll need a set of picture boxes, so we can create an array. So picture box, and then to do the two-dimensional array in C#, syntax is a little weird, so we're going to do the square brackets, comma, square, and then I'm going to call this blocks. All right. So then that'll set up our variable for our array of picture boxes. But of course, that doesn't, just because we declare an array doesn't mean that those blocks are going to end up on our form. So we still have to do some other stuff. So we're going to go here below the constructor. Remember, this is the constructor here. This is constructor. And we're going to create a private method, private void, and we're going to call it set blocks. And we'll have a function for this. And make sure it's private there. Okay. So I don't think I need this or this or this anymore. Okay. Alright, so to set up our blocks, we first need to decide. Give me 1 second. I'm going to have a new pet dog. I'm going to try to see if I can get him to stop barking. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So here what we're going to do is we're going to set the height and the width of each of our blocks. So we'll do block height equals, and we can say for now 20 for the height, or maybe 25, so that matches our ball. And we can do the width of the blocks, block width, and that can be 100. And then what we're going to do is here, we set up our variable for our blocks array, but we haven't initialized it. So we're going to do blocks equals new pick box, and then we're going to set, we need to set the row, the number of rows and the number of columns. So we have that here at the top. So we'll do row, comma, columns. So this will create an array of 5 by 5. Okay. And whenever we're dealing with two-dimensional arrays, we always have to have two nested for loops. So we'll have our first loop, so for int x equals 0, while x is less than the number of rows, and then x plus plus, so that's our first for loop. Then we need our second for loop. It's going to be int y. Well, we'll set y to 0, while y is less than columns, and then we'll do y plus plus. Okay. Now, first we created the variable for the two-dimensional array. Then we initialized our two-dimensional array variable. But then now each element in this array also needs to be initialized. So we'll start with blocks sub x, comma, sub y. And we'll set it equal to new picture box. Right, so that'll put a picture box in every block, in every element in our array. And we called the constructor for the picture box. Okay. Now, what we can do is we can set all the properties for each element here. So we'll do blocks sub x sub y dot, and then we'll set the width of the picture box equal to the variable we put here. So that's going to be block width. And then we'll do the same thing. So blocks x comma y for the height. And we'll set that equal to block height. Okay. And then we will set the distance of the block from the top. Okay, so we'll do blocks x comma y, and we'll set the top here equal to the block height times x. Okay, so that'll place the first block at the top of our form. All right, so the height of the block is 25, so 25 times 0 is going to be 0. So the first row, all the blocks are going to be at the top. At the top edge of the block is going to touch the top edge of the form. Now, when the next iteration of the loop, right, because we have 2 loops, on the next iteration, when row goes from 0 to 1, then it'll multiply 25 times 1, which is going to be 25. And then when the outer loop runs again, then it'll do block height, which is 25 times 2, which is 50. So that'll put all the blocks, it'll put them on every single row, right? And we'll do the same thing for the left. Blocks sub x sub y dot left, and we'll multiply that by the width of the blocks times y. So when y is 0, then the first block will be at the, let's look at the picture real quick. All right, so the first block's going to be right here on the edge of the form, on the left edge of the form. Then when y becomes 1, then it'll put it, it'll multiply the width, which is 100 times 1. So then it'll end up somewhere here. And then the next one will end up somewhere there. And as y increases, so does the distance of each block from the left edge. All right. And then the last thing we can set here is going to be the back color of the block. So blocks x comma y dot back color, and you can choose any color you want. The colors come in enumeration, so we can do color dot, and then that gives us a list of all the colors. So we can do black, blue, we can do maybe green. Is there a green somewhere? Let me see if I do green. Yeah, there's a green right there. So we can set the back color of every block to green. Okay. So that's just here we could, or you could also use the RGB code, but instead of doing that, we can just use this enumeration here. All right. Now, once we set up our block the way we want it, then the next thing we need to do, and we need to do this for every single block, is we need to add this block to our form, right? So to add it to our form, we're going to do this dot controls dot add, and then we're going to add in our blocks sub x y. So this will actually add it to the form, right? Without this code here, the picture box would never be added to the form. We would never see it, right? So we need to add each, after we set up the block, then we need to add it to the form. And that's what this code here does. This refers to the form, right? Because that's the CS file that we're working with. So this refers to form 1. As you hover over it, you can see that here. Okay. Now what we're going to do is this set blocks, we need to set up the blocks when the form first loads. So we can do that from the constructor here. So I'm going to do set blocks. So I'll call the function, and then this function will set up our blocks. We have 5 by 5, it'll be 25 blocks. So let's see how it looks. So let's run that. Alright, so we have a big old green mess here. So this may or may not work for us. Alright. So we either need some sort of outline, because we're not seeing them because they're all stuck together. So let's go back here to our controls. Let me view the controls real quick. Is there some sort of outline property I can use? Let's see. There may not be. Oh, border style. Let's do... That's fixed single. Fixed 3D. So that gives it some sort of border there. Maybe fixed single. No. Yeah, fixed single looks okay. Let's try fixed single also on our paddle. It's kind of hard to see. Fixed 3D. That's a little bit more noticeable. May not be the best border, but it works. Alright. Let's go back here and we can adjust that on each block. So I'm going to do blocks x sub y dot border style equals border style dot fix 3D. Okay. So we'll see if that sets our borders, and now we can see our blocks a little bit better. Right? The only thing is we have this extra edge here. Do we have enough to put a row of 6 blocks maybe? So let's change row and column. Or let's change the column maybe. So maybe 6 columns. Okay, so run that. You see, now it fills up the edge, more or less. Okay. But notice how the ball is going through the blocks, right? So we're also going to need to check the collision for each of the blocks to see if one of them is hit by the ball. If the ball intersects with one of the picture boxes on top, then that picture box needs to disappear, right? Okay, so we're still not done. But we will be soon. All right. So we're going to go back to our ticker. And here, we want to detect collision with the blocks. Okay. So for that, we're going to need our nested for loop again. X is less than row. X plus plus. Okay, and then we'll have another nested for loop. So int y 0. Well, y is less than column. And then y plus plus. All right. So then here what we're going to do is if pick ball bounds intersects with, and then we're going to go through each block here. So block sub x sub y dot bounds. Oops. Dot bounds. So if it intersects and intersects with returns either true or false, it's bool. So you don't have to put true if you don't want. So you can leave it like this. Now, if it does intersect, then we want the block to disappear. So to do that, we're going to do blocks sub x comma y, and then there's a property called visible, and we're going to change it to false. Right? So as soon as it intersects with one of the blocks, then we're going to make it disappear. And we need to change the v-speed because it needs to bounce off of the block. Otherwise, it'll just go right through all of them. So we don't want that. So we'll need to change the v-speed as soon as it hits one of the blocks. Okay. So then now, let's run this. See what it does. Okay. So the ball's going to go up. It's going to hit one of the blocks. We'll hit two blocks. Oh, it's like floating now. It's weird. It's acting a bit strange. Oh, look at that. It bounced off the block even though the block is no longer there. Or at least we think it's no longer there. It's actually still there. And that's why it's acting like that. It'll never actually get to the next layers because even though the blocks are not visible, that doesn't mean that the blocks are not still on the form. They're still there. They're just not visible. So it's going to bounce off of them. And it's going to act real weird. Okay. So we're going to need to modify our condition a bit to deal with that. So here on the if, we're going to say if it intersects and if blocks sub x comma y dot visible equals true. Right? So if it's visible and it intersects, then set it to false, change the v-speed. Right? So even if it does intersect, after the ball has already disappeared, or the block has already disappeared, even if it intersects again, it's not going to change the v-speed, because the v-speed is what's making it bounce back and forth. Right? So now this should work a little bit better. You can just hover above it here. So it's going to hits a few blocks. Okay. I'll make it hit there. And actually, you can make the ball move a little bit faster if you change the horizontal speed. So you can try to change it right now. This might take a little bit. Alright, so now, before it was bouncing off all the invisible blocks. So now it's no longer doing that. So now it's going to the next row. You see, so now it should hit. All right, so even if it intersected with the block, since the block is no longer visible, then it's not going to run this code here in the if statement. So we need both conditions. We need to see if it intersects and if the block is already visible. If it's no longer visible, then don't do anything. That's what that means here. We can change the horizontal speed. So instead of 1, let's try 10. See how fast that is. It's probably going to be bouncing all over the place. Wow, this is like super ball right there. Okay. That's a little too fast. That's too extreme there. We don't want that. Okay. That's more of like bullet ball. Even 5 is kind of fast. I find 3 is pretty good. I like 3 the best. It's fast enough, but yet you can control it. Now, notice when I try to hover over the paddle, it doesn't move. I have to have the cursor a little bit above it. So that can be adjusted. You probably need a different event. So whenever you hover over the paddle, you also want it to move. So it would probably be a similar formula. But for the most part, it's working. Working pretty good. You can play around with the intervals of the timer and the speed. And you can do pretty much anything you want. Even these picture boxes, you can actually put pictures in them. So you can make it look more like a ball or more like a paddle. But I can leave all that to you. This is just the basics of getting this type of game to run. And a lot of games use similar mechanics. They all require timers, function to run, different events to follow the mouse around, changing the top and the left and the coordinates. So a lot of things going on here. And in case this video seemed a little too like I guess too much information at once, just play around with it, practice. It's just a way to introduce you to where we have similar concepts in this course that we've done. We've done classes, we've done forms, we've done two-dimensional arrays. This is just a combination of all those things put together, so you can see them put to use with something a little bit more practical or more useful. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to make any changes to the game, you can use some of these similar concepts to build things like Space Invaders and pretty much a lot of other games. You can use a lot of these concepts for that. All right. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.